Rhonda Heaton hoped she'd found the man of her dreams when she met gentle giant Bob Cash.
Bob was like a gentleman from back when they would open the doors for you.
She'd come home every day, happier than ever. She was head over heels. She was in love.
But Rhonda's dream man was not who he seemed to be.
No one had a clue what he was capable of doing.
And before long, Rhonda's storybook romance became a tale of terror.
Her clock was running out. She didn't know if her next breath would be her last one.
It was terrifying. He would come in the room and say the same thing, "Are you dead yet?"
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. After 2 failed marriages, single mom Rhonda Heaton of Hayden, Colorado, was feeling a bit discouraged. But that wasn't about to stop the 43-year-old dental assistant from looking for love.
When you get married, you expect to get married and stay married. And with 40 having been married twice, it really put a little pressure on me to think, I really want to do this forever.
So in the fall of 2005, Rhonda jumped into the online dating pool.
I started reading the profiles and looking at pictures. I was looking for someone who was very honest, caring and giving, someone that wasn't a drinker or a smoker.
Suddenly, Rhonda was drawn to the photo of a familiar-looking 51-year-old man named Robert Cash, a clerk at her neighborhood grocery store.
And I said, oh my gosh, I know who that is. I had seen him in the past and had noticed that he was always really bubbly at work.
Never one to wait, Rhonda left her phone number at the store for Bob, and a couple of days later, the two were sitting down at a restaurant to enjoy their first date.
He was just kind of old school and, like a gentleman from, back when they would open the doors for you.
And at over 6 feet tall, Bob was just Rhonda's type.
I've always been attracted to tall men, and so he was tall and, medium build.
As the two opened up to each other, Rhonda noticed some fun coincidences.
I had mentioned that I like motorcycles, and he had actually bought the motorcycle I was looking to purchase. And then I looked over at him, and we're both picking our tomatoes off of our sandwich exactly at the same time.
Rhonda shared that she was twice divorced with 2 teenage daughters, as Bob explained why he was single with no children.
He had told me that he was a caretaker for his mother. He was living in the same home where his mother had passed away the year before.
I was a caregiver.
I thought that was wonderful. Somebody that would devote their life to taking care of their parents.
But the clincher for Rhonda was when Bob told her he didn't drink.
Sorry about that.
I was really glad to hear that.
I don't drink.
Once I dated a young man that had a severe drinking problem, so I was looking for someone that didn't have those issues.
As the date ended, Rhonda couldn't help but feel she'd landed herself a keeper. And the feeling grew as the relationship took off at warp speed.
My mom was walking on water. I remember she'd come home every day, happier than ever. She was head over heels. She was in love.
So in November of 2005, 2 months and 2 days from their first date, Rhonda and Bob headed to the courthouse to make their union official.
We did it on the sly. I didn't even tell my children. It was kind of exciting.
I felt it was rushed. It was a surprise, not knowing, but she could talk about nothing other than how happy she was.
The newlyweds were excited to start their new life together. So Rhonda and her daughters moved to Bob's house in Steamboat Springs, 24 miles away, to turn his bachelor pad into a sweet family home. Everything seemed perfect until the holidays came around.
Bob's sister had invited us over for Thanksgiving. They were having wine with the meal, and Bob's sister had asked Bob if he wanted a glass. And I said, Bob doesn't drink. And there was a very dead calm in the room. I could feel the awkwardness in the air, and then it just kind of got left at that.
But Rhonda couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was going on.
I thought, what do they know that I don't know?
And soon she would find out her new husband had some secrets.
She was scared to go back to the house. Something didn't feel right.
I was devastated. Things were spiraling out of control.
In November of 2005, after a stilted introduction to her new husband Bob's family, Rhonda Heaton focused on building a new life as a couple.
I thought that this was the one, and you always hope that's the person you'll be with until you die. Thought that was what I had found.
But just a few months into their marriage, Rhonda started to notice how her teetotaling husband had begun drinking.
He started bringing beer into the home, which, normally is not cause for concern. However, I had made it clear I didn't want to be with someone that drank.
When Rhonda asked him about it, Bob dismissed the occasional beer as just something to take the edge off a hard day at work.
I didn't want to make a big thing out of it, and I kind of took it on initially as it was more my problem than his because I was not comfortable with it.
But over the next few years, after Rhonda's daughters moved out on their own, Bob's drinking was getting out of control.
I would drive the vehicle and look for my sunglasses and find alcohol hidden in the glove box. And when I asked him why he was hiding alcohol, he said, well, sometimes I have a bad day at work and I need a drink before I come home. It concerned me because drinking and driving is so dangerous.
And Rhonda slowly watched her once loving husband become a belligerent bully.
He was very complimentary in the beginning, and then he was saying how fat I was or comments that were rude. It just was so out of character from what I thought he was like.
But the final nail in the coffin came in March of 2010.
Bob lost his job at the grocery store. We were in the middle of a pretty significant recession in the United States, and it was difficult for Bob to get another job. So the loss of that income, however modest it was, it put a strain on their relationship.
Now, Rhonda was the sole provider.
He was sitting at home drinking, and each day that I would come home from work, he would be more and more drunk. He wasn't talking to me about what was happening. It did hurt me. But I was hoping that maybe if he could seek help and get better, that maybe we could work through it, and I didn't want to be divorced again.
So Rhonda reached out to Bob's family for help. Little did she know just how eye-opening that would be.
I called his sister and said, there's a problem. I'm not getting through to him. That is when I found out that he had problems with alcohol in his past. And she said he has always had a drinking problem.
The family's awkward reaction at Thanksgiving now made sense to Rhonda. And it got worse. Rhonda was floored to learn that the story Bob had told her about taking care of his dying mother was a classic spin job.
His sister did say that Bob wasn't actually taking care of his mother, that his mother was actually taking care of him.
And now Rhonda was doing the same thing. Her huge-hearted husband was nothing more than a giant liar.
I don't believe in lying whatsoever. This was not the man I thought I had married, and it was time to go ahead and get out of the relationship.
So in April of 2010, after 4 years of marriage, Rhonda filed for divorce.
I felt bad for my mom. It was another marriage, another relationship, another man who had let her down.
And with Bob unemployed, Rhonda was unable to keep up with the mortgage payments on her own. So they had no choice but to put the house on the market.
I didn't really have anywhere to go, and Bob said that he didn't have anywhere to go either, and neither of us had financial means to move out of the home. So we ended up having to stay in the house together.
But in the weeks that followed, Rhonda's wise fiscal choice would cost her dearly when Bob decided to take matters into his own hands.
Nobody really thought he would do what he did.
He planned to do it step by step.
And I said, oh my God, get the ambulance, get the police.
In April of 2010, Rhonda Heaton filed for divorce from her husband Bob and waited for their home to sell.
I started sitting in my car in the parking lot after work until it was time to come home to go to bed because I didn't want to be in the home with him because he started having kind of peculiar behavior. He would follow me around the house as I did things and not ever be saying anything, just following me the whole time. I told the real estate agent that was selling our home, you need to get me out of this house.
So Rhonda was grateful to her friend Jim when in June he offered to let her stay at his place in Vegas for a few days. But when Rhonda returned, Bob was waiting.
He was upset with me that I hadn't told him exactly where I went, but we were already filed for divorce. So we weren't in a relationship.
Then one night when Rhonda came home from work, she got on the phone with Jim.
He was very concerned about me being in the home and thought it would be best if I didn't stay there, but I didn't have anywhere that I could go.
Rhonda thanked her friend, then glanced up to see Bob standing there.
Bob overheard me, and at the end of the phone call, I have a habit of saying I love you to my friends, and I think he mistook the way that I said it.
A few hours later, Rhonda crawled into bed, emotionally drained and ready for a good night's sleep. But at 6:30 a.m., Rhonda awoke to a shocking situation.
I heard the bedroom door open, and I could hear him walking into the room. And before I got a chance to ask him why he was in the room, I felt some type of impact. And I wasn't sure what was happening because in my mind, I was thinking there's an intruder. And I said, Bob, what was that?
His answer shook her to the core.
A shot.
And I said, oh my God, get the ambulance, get the police. And then he said, no. And I said, why? And he says, I want you to die. And that's when I realized what exactly had happened, that he had shot me in the back. I couldn't feel my hands at all. I couldn't feel from the knee down. He was pacing up and down in the room, and he was yelling and screaming at me. Just screaming at the top of his lungs.
Bob turned and left the room, leaving Rhonda bleeding in her bed alone. The man who'd once taken Rhonda's breath away was now trying to take her life away.
Rhonda said, I don't want to die. Within seconds, a shot was fired.
And he says, there's no going back now.
If you have a story for Who the Bleep and would like to appear on the series, go to investigation.discovery.com. On the morning of June 11th, 2010, Rhonda Heaton lay frozen in shock and fear after her husband Bob Cash shot her in the spine and left her to die.
I laid there and tried to decide, what am I going to do? I wasn't able to move, and I was watching the clock.
Suddenly, Bob returned.
Bob was coming in the room every 20 to 30 minutes and say the same thing.
Are you dead yet?
Every time he came in the room, I held my breath. I just kept telling myself, dead people don't move. and dead people don't breathe. I had so many thoughts. I just knew I couldn't leave this with my kids to live with, seeing their mother die this way.
Almost 2 hours after shooting Rhonda, Bob came in to check on her once again.
And he took my pulse on my neck. And I just kept praying that I was far enough gone that it wouldn't register. And I just held my breath. And he says, well, I guess you're dead now.
Bob left the room again, and before long, Rhonda heard a sharp pounding at the door. Her co-workers, concerned when she didn't show up for work, had called the police.
It was pounding so hard. And I thought, this is it. They're gonna come get me now and it will be all right.
A few moments later, a shot rang out.
The officers didn't know where the shot was fired at, where it came from, but at that point they retreated to a secure location and called for backup.
A SWAT team arrived, and within minutes they burst through the doors. They found Rhonda clinging to life.
Surprisingly, she was talking and obviously very upset, but still, it's surprising to see somebody with a gunshot wound to the back and still being able to function.
Police discovered Bob in the other bedroom, barely alive. The gunshot they heard was Bob shooting himself.
He had a very obvious gunshot wound to his chest, right over his heart. The gun was laying on the bed next to him, near his hand.
Rhonda and Bob were taken to the nearest hospital. Inside the house, police discovered a series of notes Bob left, including one that began with, "Just lost it."
And he goes on saying why he lost it, what he heard on the phone call. He heard Rhonda say, "I love you." He said, "I lost my house, I lost my wife, I lost my job, I lost everything. I don't want to start again." I guess that was his confession.
Unbelievably, they both survived. And after painful surgery to remove the bullet near her spine, Rhonda walked out of the hospital just 3 weeks later.
Her stubbornness is what kept her alive. It's what got her through. It's what saved her.
Still, the road ahead was hard. Though Bob recovered from his self-inflicted wound, he left Rhonda permanently without sensation in her hands and feet.
I tend to fall a lot. I tend to burn myself and cut myself. But the fact that I can't feel my daughter's hands and face anymore, that's the greatest loss.
So Rhonda felt at least grim satisfaction when on January 9th, 2012, Bob was made to stand in front of a jury. Finally, Rhonda came face to face with the man who tried to take her life.
It was terrifying. That was the first time since I had got shot that I was in the same room, and I didn't want to see him or hear his voice.
When Bob took the stand, he surprised everyone by claiming the shooting was an accident.
Bob testified that he was going to try and commit suicide in Rhonda's bedroom, but the gun accidentally went off inside the bedroom and it shot Rhonda. He kind of summed it up like, "I don't know how the gun went off, it just accidentally went off."
But the jury didn't buy it. Bob was convicted of attempted first-degree murder, and in April 2012, he was sentenced to 38 long years in prison.
He planned to do it step by step. Every action he took was planned. That is pure evil.
Bob was very cruel and unfeeling. Didn't seem to bother him that he was killing someone. And I live every day remembering. I don't ever stop remembering it.
Today, Rhonda still struggles with the aftermath of Bob's torture.
I don't like to have my back towards the door. I don't drive very far because I start having severe panic attacks. I don't trust people like I used to. If somebody you married is capable of this, what is everybody else capable of?
Even though she still bears scars, Rhonda doesn't let them define her.
I call it putting it on a shelf. It never goes away, ever. But you try to put it on a shelf because you have to keep going. You just make a new life.
My mom has a set of wings, and if you let them go, she'll fly. She's an amazing person. It makes your heart so happy.
Diamond relished the slow-paced New England lifestyle with her devoted, hardworking husband.
Bruce was loving and a perfect father. We were in love. We had a really nice life.
But Kathleen never suspected her husband was putting in overtime outside of the office.
He was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
And soon she'd discover the shocking truth behind her husband's deadly obsession.
He was perpetrating her as being a prostitute, as being the sex slave.
This was personal, hateful, and ultimately evil.
It was shocking. What kind of a monster was I married to?
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. In the summer of 1989, Kathleen Clark was busy climbing the corporate ladder as a stockbroker in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
I was just 22 and the world was my oyster, you know, wasn't looking really to get married or even be in a relationship or anything like that.
But all that changed when she met a handsome coworker named Bruce Steinman.
Bruce was very shy and quiet, just a polite, kind, easygoing person. One day, he wrote me a note asking to go out to lunch. It was kind of cute that he had written a note. I was like, sure.
As the two chatted over lunch, Kathleen found herself intrigued by her date.
He just had an air about him that was different than other guys. It felt like he really wanted to woo me and impress me. We started doing everything together.
It was a whirlwind romance, and after 6 months of dating, Kathleen had no doubts when Bruce popped the question. Almost 2 years later, Kathleen and Bruce tied the knot on a gorgeous beach in Maine.
It was a beautiful day. I was very, very happy. All my friends were with me. It was an awesome, awesome day.
I could see how happy she was. They looked great together. It was just like a match made in heaven.
The happy couple settled down in a tiny New Hampshire town just 40 miles outside of Boston.
It was great. Bruce got a job that he liked in computer technology sales. I was thrilled with my new house. We had a really nice life.
5 years later, the two were overjoyed when they welcomed a son into the world.
We were very happy. Bruce was an awesome, awesome dad. He loved having a son, and he was very helpful.
They were always together. I definitely thought that they were the perfect American family.
Over the next 13 years, Kathleen kept the home fires burning, while Bruce's job in IT sales sent him on regular travel.
Bruce was gone more than he was home. But it was okay, it didn't bother me. You just get used to it. Our son and I were both very happy when Bruce would be coming home.
But by the spring of 2011, whenever Bruce was around, Kathleen found it harder and harder to keep his attention.
Bruce always liked his cell phone, but it became almost an obsession. One night, we were at a friend's house for dinner, and the guys always go outside, and Bruce didn't even go out with them. He just stayed in the house, sitting on the couch, doing something on his phone. It became almost an embarrassment for me, to the point that I would say to him, "What are you doing on the phone?"
I'm just checking some work emails, but I just needed a few more minutes.
And after Bruce took on a new job, Kathleen noticed more bizarre behavior from her husband.
Bruce was still working with government sales, but he was going at least twice a month to the DC area. right around that time. He started being very nitpicky with me over everything. One morning I came down and he had every cabinet, every drawer, everything wide open in the kitchen. And I knew that he didn't like that I didn't close the doors completely shut, but it was creepy to come down and see that he had done that. It was just odd behavior over insignificant things. And when I tried to talk to him about it, he would just pass it off. I'm under a lot of stress at work. So I'm like, maybe he is. I just didn't know what was going on with him. But I knew something was wrong.
And Kathleen would soon discover the sweet, affable man she married was really a cold-hearted snake.
There was something sinister going on.
He launched an attack. There was nothing that this man would do.
I was terrified. I knew my marriage was in trouble, but I never imagined that my son and I were in danger.
By the fall of 2011, Kathleen Steinman's happy 20-year marriage to her husband, Bruce, had taken a strange and disturbing turn.
I really had no idea what was causing the change. He was constantly on the phone. All of a sudden, it was like I couldn't do anything right. I couldn't say anything right. It just became very tense to be around him.
Kathleen told me that Bruce got very demanding. I just thought that they were going through a rough patch.
Soon, the tension between the Steinmans was unbearable.
When I would hear the car pull in, I could feel my stomach drop. I'm like, oh, he's home now. So I just stayed away because I knew he was going to try to find something to pick a fight with me about. Like, he'd walk in one door, I'd go out the other.
And Kathleen's friends noticed the change in Bruce, too.
I did have one friend who said maybe he's having an affair. But Bruce was very, quiet, not really an outgoing guy. I just never, ever imagined him ever having an affair.
But 2 days before Christmas, Kathleen had her first inkling that maybe her husband was hiding a secret.
I was down in the kitchen and his phone happened to be on the counter. And it buzzed and he had gotten a text and it just said, "Not sure if I'm going to be here."
Kathleen noticed the text was from a woman named Victoria.
It wasn't a name that I recognized. I just saw the text and thought, oh my God, is that a woman? Maybe he really is having an affair. So I took it upstairs and just handed him the phone and said, "You've got a text, are you having an affair?" And he said, "Of course not."
No, it's not.
I said, "Then who is the text from?"
Bruce humbly admitted that Victoria was a stripper friend of his buddies, letting them know she wouldn't be dancing that night.
I was really upset. And he looked into my eyes and told me he would never, ever cheat on me. He wouldn't put me through anything like that.
I'm sorry.
It was really bizarre. I didn't believe what he had told me. It made me more suspicious.
But after the new year, her confidence was bolstered when the old Bruce seemed to be back.
Bruce had asked me to go out to dinner one night. He told me that he knew he hadn't been treating me right and things were going to get better now. Something had changed. He seemed to be a little more back in tune with his family and family life again.
So on June 15th, 2012, when Bruce made plans to visit his mother in Massachusetts for the day, Kathleen trusted him completely.
Bruce had told me that he might be home late. I didn't sleep very well at all because I kept thinking he was coming in.
But the next morning, when she woke up alone, Kathleen realized Bruce hadn't come home at all.
I tried calling him, but I went right into voicemail, and that was it. So it was very surprising because you couldn't pry the phone out of his hand for anything. I wasn't actually worried that something had happened to him. I was just angry at that point because Bruce had never done that before in the marriage.
Before Kathleen could gather her thoughts, the phone rang.
Bruce's brother called, which when I saw the caller ID was odd. His brother rarely called the house.
And he had some shocking news for Kathleen.
His brother said that Bruce had been arrested. I was just completely baffled.
When Bruce's brother revealed the alarming charges against her husband, Kathleen knew her world would never be the same.
He was like two totally different people.
He just lost control.
I was absolutely shocked. And I thought, oh my God, what could he possibly have done?
On June 16, 2012, Kathleen Steinman was beside herself when her brother-in-law told her that her husband Bruce was sitting in an Arlington, Virginia jail cell.
I thought, oh my God, what could he possibly have done? Bruce's brother told me that one of the charges was stalking, and the other one was unlawful filming of a nude person. So I knew that it involved another woman. All I could keep thinking was that he was having an affair.
Kathleen barely had a moment to collect her thoughts before Bruce called on the other line.
The first thing he said was,
I'm in jail.
and I said, you fell in love with another woman? And he said, of course not. I was tricked and duped.
Of course not.
I said, what did you do to this woman? Why did you do this? And he just kept saying, she owed me money, she owed me money. And he said, I'm gonna need help. And then we got disconnected.
Kathleen was left with nothing but a dial tone and a million questions.
I was totally shocked. I had no idea what was happening.
Desperate to learn more about her husband's case, Kathleen went searching the internet and made a shocking connection.
I did see the woman's name connected to his name and recognized it.
The woman Bruce had been charged with stalking was Victoria, the stripper who had texted him.
And I clicked on her name, and that's when I found all these porn websites. I thought, oh my gosh, it wasn't just a woman that he knew or had been having an affair with, it was actually a prostitute. To actually see it and watch it, it was very traumatic.
I was shocked. Bruce would be the last person in the world I would ever expect to do what he had done. I think Kathleen was blindsided.
The following week, Kathleen accepted Bruce's call from jail, but it wasn't quite what she expected.
He wanted money for bail. He said, if you had been a better wife, this wouldn't have happened. He actually said, if you have an ounce of humanity, you'll help me. So he was just saying all the wrong things to me.
Listen to me, Kathleen.
After 21 years of marriage, Kathleen was done.
He was not the guy I thought I married. Nothing seemed to matter anymore except what he needed. I was angry. Anything he did to me, he's also doing to his son.
Kathleen told Bruce she wasn't bailing him out. She had something else in mind.
I told him I wanted a divorce, and he didn't like that.
I don't care what I've done. I don't care how I treated you.
He was almost belligerent. So it just made me angry that he was so selfish and so narcissistic.
But even behind bars, Bruce was able to use his allowed phone calls to wreak havoc on Kathleen's life.
The day after that phone call, my cell phone was shut off, and I just thought the bill was due and Bruce was in jail and he didn't pay it, so that's why the phone was shut off. But then I started getting bounced check notices. So I called the bank, and they said, oh, the money was transferred out.
Kathleen was shocked to discover that Bruce had removed almost all of their savings.
Bruce had called the bank. He left me $250. I was so angry and confused, but I thought he was in jail and I was safe.
Then on July 3rd, Kathleen's cable and Wi-Fi went out too.
I knew it was Bruce. He did that in one swift move. I was completely done with this man.
But the following month, Kathleen received an unexpected visit from the local police department.
They had come to the house because Bruce actually did make bail and was released from jail.
Kathleen had no idea how, but the officers confirmed that Bruce was back in town and told her a little detail about his stalking charges.
Bruce had sent his mistress a dead snake. That act in itself was a lethal act, so law enforcement was afraid that Bruce may come after Kathleen next.
They suggested that I go and get a protective order immediately. I was terrified at that point.
There was no telling where Bruce was, but Kathleen would discover everything her husband had done to his mistress and what he had in store for her.
This was personal. He did everything he could to hurt her.
Every night, I would barricade all the doors. I never thought he could be that vicious and vengeful.
In July of 2012, Kathleen Steinman was horrified when police informed her that her estranged husband, Bruce, had made bail and was back in the area while awaiting trial.
I was granted a temporary protective order, but I was terrified.
And it seemed not even a protective order could put an end to Bruce's vengeful behavior. 2 weeks later, Kathleen and her son came home to something strange.
Everything seemed fine. We were sort of settling in, and I went to get the laptop and my phone. And they were missing. I knew it was Bruce. It was scary knowing that Bruce had been in the house. I didn't know if he had been coming and going before. So I called the police.
Things were escalating, so law enforcement came and they actually swept the house, sweeping it for monitoring devices.
Investigators found nothing, but Kathleen's growing involvement with police meant she was finally finding out exactly how her husband landed in jail, and it made her skin crawl. Detectives told Kathleen that Bruce met Victoria on one of his business flights.
At some point, the relationship went from a simple romance to a sexual relationship, but she told him that the relationship was over. He did everything he could to hurt her.
He had in his mind to go after her however he could and inflict pain and revenge that he couldn't do in person.
And he did so with a vengeance. It turned out Victoria was not a prostitute at all.
The detective told me that Bruce created all those websites, making it look like she was a prostitute.
Bruce Steinman secretly filmed her and him having sex, then used these images on porn sites that he created, advertising her for sex.
Bruce included her employer's phone number, her boss's phone number, her home address.
A whole slew of people were coming to this woman's door seeking sex. She was very frightened.
That September, while Bruce was still awaiting trial, he set his sights on Kathleen.
Bruce started terrorizing me using the laptop he stole from me. He kept changing the password so that I couldn't access my own emails. He would listen to my voicemails and then delete them. I didn't know what he might do.
So Kathleen was thrilled when on November 9th, 2012, she learned from the Arlington Police Department that Bruce was arrested outside of Victoria's apartment.
One of the conditions for his release was he was to stay away from this woman. But he didn't want this. He was stalking her again. The police were staking out the apartment, and they caught him red-handed. He had on him a knife, which he had been using to slash her tires.
When I found out he was arrested again, I was like, thank God. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
In December 2012, Bruce Steinman pled guilty to attempted extortion, 2 counts of stalking, and felony identity theft. He was sentenced to 7 years in jail.
It's very difficult for me to come to terms with the fact that someone I love would be capable of doing these things to anyone, let alone his own child and to me. There's no answer for it. There's no reason for it. Well,
I think Kathleen is going to be cautious. But I think definitely she's made.
And people do. On a wind-scraped stretch of highway outside Flagstaff, August 1977, a car door stood open under a sky still burning with the last light of day. The engine was cold. The radio was silent. The keys were gone. And 23-year-old Daniel Mercer had vanished without a trace. No blood. No body. No witnesses who saw enough. Just tire marks dissolving into sand and a single photograph later cataloged as Evidence Item 47, a photograph that would disappear from the case file before anyone realized how much it mattered. By midnight, sirens cut through the dry Arizona air. State troopers combed the roadside with flashlights. Volunteers fanned out across scrub and rock. Helicopters hovered, blades thundering against canyon walls. Daniel's parents waited under the harsh fluorescence of a sheriff's office lobby, staring at a clock that ticked too loudly. Missing adult male. Possible foul play. No confirmed sighting after 6:42 p.m. The desert swallowed sound. It swallowed footprints. It swallowed hope. Daniel Mercer wasn't the type to run. He was a mechanic. Quiet. Methodical. The kind of man who fixed what was broken and kept his word. He had left work early that evening after a call from an unknown number. According to a coworker, Daniel stepped outside to take it. When he returned, his face had changed. Pale. Focused. He grabbed his jacket and said he had to settle something. That was the last time anyone heard his voice. The abandoned car was found 13 miles from town, parked crooked on the shoulder as if the driver had stopped in a hurry. There were no signs of struggle inside. The seats were intact. The glove compartment closed. But investigators noticed something unsettling. Daniel's wallet was still in the console, cash untouched, ID in place. Whoever leaves in a rush doesn't leave their life behind. By sunrise, the story hit local headlines. Young man missing in desert mystery. Within days, whispers hardened into rumors. Gambling debt. A secret relationship. A deal gone wrong. Every theory bloomed, then withered. Detectives chased leads across county lines. They questioned friends. They tracked the unknown phone number to a payphone outside a now-demolished diner. No fingerprints. No camera footage. Just static and dead ends. Then came the first fracture in the investigation. Evidence Item 47, a photograph recovered from the passenger floorboard, was logged, sealed, and placed into storage. The photo showed Daniel standing beside an unfamiliar pickup truck. The image was grainy, overexposed, taken weeks before his disappearance. On the back, a date scribbled in blue ink. July 18, 1977. No explanation. No names. Detectives intended to trace the truck. But when the file was pulled months later, the photograph was gone. No record of transfer. No sign-out sheet. Just an empty evidence sleeve and a clerical shrug. The case cooled faster than the desert at night. By 1979, Daniel Mercer was officially listed as presumed dead. No charges filed. No suspects named. The file thickened with dust. New crimes demanded attention. New victims filled headlines. The Mercer family moved away, carrying a grief without a grave. Years passed. The sheriff retired. Deputies transferred. Boxes shifted from shelf to shelf in a storage room where fluorescent lights hummed over forgotten tragedies. The Daniel Mercer file became what law enforcement calls a cold case, a phrase that sounds clinical, almost harmless, until you realize it means time is winning. But time has a way of circling back. In 2023, during a routine audit of archived evidence in Coconino County, A junior records technician opened an unmarked container mislabeled under a separate burglary case from the late 70s. Inside were loose photographs, yellowed reports, a rusted keychain, and one image that didn't belong. A young man standing beside a pickup truck. On the back, in fading blue ink, July 18, 1977. The technician frowned, cross-referenced the name scribbled faintly in pencil. Mercer. 46 years after it vanished, evidence item 47 had resurfaced. By then, most of the original investigators were gone. Some retired, some deceased. The Mercer case was little more than a footnote in departmental history. But the rediscovered photograph ignited something electric, a jolt through an office accustomed to closure rates and statistics. Because in 1977, the truck in that image meant nothing. In 2023, it meant everything. Digital enhancement sharpened the grain. License plate numbers once blurred into white noise began to take form under forensic software unimaginable in the Carter administration. Letters emerged. Numbers aligned. A partial plate became a full registration. The truck belonged to a man named Harold Bennett. Bennett had lived 20 miles from where Daniel's car was found. In 1977, he was 32, employed intermittently, known for minor assaults and bar fights. Questioned briefly during the original investigation, he denied knowing Daniel Mercer. There had been no proof to contradict him. Until now. Because zoomed into the corner of that recovered photograph, just barely visible in the truck's rear window, was a reflection, two figures. Daniel, unmistakable, and another man holding the camera, Harold Bennett. The interview transcript from 1977 resurfaced alongside the photo. Bennett had claimed he had never met Daniel. He said he'd been home the night Daniel disappeared. No alibi confirmed, but nothing disproved either. Without physical evidence, without a witness placing them together, detectives had moved on. They never saw the photograph. They never knew it existed. The rediscovery triggered a formal cold case review. Detectives trained in modern forensic reconstruction reopened the Mercer file. They canvassed old neighborhoods, tracked surviving relatives, exhumed archived witness statements. Bennett himself had died in 2009. A heart attack. No criminal convictions beyond misdemeanors. But death does not close a case. Investigators located Bennett's former property, sold twice since his passing. A modest home with a detached garage, sitting on land that sloped toward open desert. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in. Soil samples were taken. The current homeowner watched from a distance as officers marked a rectangular anomaly beneath what used to be a tool shed. 46 years is a long time for secrets to sleep. The first shovel broke ground under a sky that looked exactly as it had in 1977, wide, indifferent, mercilessly blue. And as dirt gave way to something darker beneath, the question that had haunted Arizona for nearly half a century returned with a force that felt almost violent. What happened to Daniel Mercer on that August evening in the desert? The answer had been buried in a mislabeled box. In a photograph no one saw. In a lie told calmly across a metal interrogation table. The desert keeps secrets, but sometimes it gives them back. The first strike of metal against something solid did not sound like rock. It was dull.
Hollow. Wrong.
Detectives froze mid-motion, desert wind sweeping grit across their boots. The rectangular anomaly beneath the old tool shed had been mapped carefully, measured twice, photographed from every angle before excavation began. They had expected debris. Scrap metal. Forgotten junk. Harold Bennett had been known to hoard. But this sound carried weight. The soil above it was compacted, layered unnaturally. Not the loose, drifting sand common to northern Arizona, but packed earth, deliberate, controlled. Someone had dug here once. Someone had filled it back in. A forensic anthropologist stepped forward as the outline emerged, weathered plywood, fractured at the edges, fastened with rusted nails. A makeshift box. Not a coffin. Not a crate designed for preservation. Something hurried. Something concealed. 46 years of heat had baked the wood brittle. 46 monsoon seasons had pressed the soil down like a lid. When the final boards were pried loose, silence settled so completely that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Inside lay bone. The skeleton was incomplete, but unmistakably human. Long bones aligned, skull tilted slightly to the right as if the body had been lowered without care. No clothing remained intact, only fragments, fibers fused into soil, metallic glints where buttons once were. A forensic photographer documented every inch. Close-ups, wide frames, the skull, the hands, the soil layers. Evidence bags filled one by one, labeled with precision the original investigation never had the chance to apply. An identification would take time. DNA extraction from decades-old remains was delicate work. But already, in the pit carved under Harold Bennett's former garage, the narrative of 1977 had shifted from disappearance to homicide. Daniel Mercer was no longer missing. He was here. The news moved fast. By evening, local stations interrupted programming. Arizona 1977 cold case breakthrough, remains discovered. The Mercer name returned to headlines for the first time in decades. Social media filled with speculation,
Shock.
disbelief. A community that had long ago resigned itself to mystery was suddenly staring at something tangible, something terrible. Investigators reopened every document from the original file. Old interview tapes were digitized, their static scrubbed clean by modern software. Bennett's voice crackled through speakers in a climate-controlled evidence room, calm and measured.
No, sir.
I don't know him. Never met the guy. The lie now felt almost audible. The autopsy report, drafted within 48 hours of the excavation, delivered the detail that changed everything. A fracture to the occipital bone. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. No defensive wounds visible on the skeletal remains, but the angle suggested Daniel had been struck from behind. No weapon recovered yet. No rope. No bullet casings. Just a skull bearing the signature of violence. The forensic timeline placed death within days of August 12, 1977. The same night Daniel vanished. Investigators turned their focus to Bennett's history with renewed urgency. Employment records revealed he had worked intermittently at an auto parts supplier that serviced Daniel's garage. Not close friends. Not documented associates. But proximity existed. Opportunity lingered in that overlap. Then came the financial records. Archived bank statements showed Bennett had deposited an unusual sum in mid-August 1977, cash, totaling nearly $4,000. Adjusted for inflation, a significant amount. Daniel had recently withdrawn money from his savings, telling his sister he was investing in something big. That money was never found in his car. The wallet in the console had been a decoy of normalcy. The question shifted from who to why. Detectives located two surviving acquaintances of Bennett. Both elderly now. Both hesitant. Time dulls fear, but it does not erase it. One remembered Bennett mentioning a business opportunity with a young mechanic that summer. The other recalled seeing a heated argument outside a bar weeks before Daniel disappeared. He said the kid owed him. The witness whispered. Said he'd handle it. Why hadn't this surfaced in 1977? Because memory fades and because no one had tied Bennett to Daniel conclusively. Without that photograph, without evidence item 47, there was no thread strong enough to pull. Now there was. Forensic analysts enhanced the recovered image further. The pickup truck's paint damage matched archived DMV inspection photos from Bennett's vehicle in 1978. A dent on the rear fender. A chipped taillight casing. Microscopic comparisons confirmed consistency. More unsettling was what digital light manipulation revealed in Daniel's expression. He wasn't smiling. His shoulders were tense. His stance angled slightly away from Bennett, as though mid-step, caught between compliance and unease. It was not a friendly snapshot. Search teams returned to the property, extending excavation beyond the original grave. Soil anomalies indicated additional disturbances, though none yielded further remains. What they did find, buried deeper and farther from the house, was a rusted length of pipe approximately 2 feet long. blunt, weighted, consistent with the fracture pattern on Daniel's skull. Trace analysis would take weeks, but circumstantial weight was building into something heavier than coincidence. The Mercer family, what remained of it, was contacted formally. Daniel's younger sister, now in her 70s, answered the call. She had grown up, grown old, carried a question across nearly 5 decades. When detectives confirmed the remains were likely Daniel's, she did not cry at first. She asked only one thing. Was he alone? They could not answer that yet. Public reaction intensified. Arizona 1977 cold case solved? Headlines asked, though investigators avoided the word solved. A suspect was deceased. A motive was forming. Evidence was resurfacing. But a courtroom would never hear the case. Closure would come without trial. DNA confirmation arrived 14 days after excavation began. A match to Daniel Mercer's surviving sibling. Statistical certainty. The bones beneath Harold Bennett's shed were Daniel. Cause of death: homicide. The district attorney's office prepared a posthumous case summary, an unusual but not unprecedented action in cold case resolutions where suspects have died. The goal was not prosecution but truth, an official acknowledgement of responsibility based on accumulated evidence. Yet one piece still nagged investigators. The phone call. The unknown number that pulled Daniel from his workplace the evening he vanished had been traced in 1977 to a payphone outside a diner. That diner, demolished in the late 80s, once stood 3 miles from Bennett's home. New forensic voice analysis was impossible. No recording of the call existed. But phone company microfilm archives, recently digitized, revealed something previously overlooked: a secondary outgoing call from that same payphone 15 minutes later. Placed to Bennett's residence. The implication tightened like a wire. Reconstructed timeline. Bennett calls Daniel from payphone. Daniel leaves work. Bennett calls home, perhaps to ensure no one is present, perhaps to stage normalcy. They meet near the highway. An argument. A blow from behind. The body transported in Bennett's truck. Buried under a shed that would stand undisturbed for decades. The desert did not witness. It endured. But investigators still lacked direct confession. Bennett had taken whatever explanation he possessed to the grave in 2009. Without him alive, motive would remain partially speculative. Financial gain suggested robbery. Pride suggested rage. A debt unsettled suggested betrayal. In reviewing archived materials, a detective discovered something else buried in paperwork: a handwritten note from 1977 and signed, tucked into the file, without follow-up. It read, "Check the shed." No indication of who wrote it. No record of detectives ever executing that suggestion. 46 years ago, someone might have known, or guessed, or tried to speak. Why was the note ignored? Misfiled? Lost among more urgent crimes? The chain of oversight became its own quiet indictment of process. A single overlooked suggestion had allowed Daniel Mercer to remain in the earth for nearly half a century. The case summary prepared for public release outlined evidence meticulously: recovered photograph linking Bennett to Mercer, burial site on Bennett's property, blunt force trauma consistent with recovered pipe, financial irregularities, phone records, witness recollections. Together, they formed a narrative strong enough for official declaration. Harold Bennett was named responsible for the homicide of Daniel Mercer. No trial. No sentence. Just a statement of facts compiled too late for justice in its traditional form. Yet something still lingered, a thin thread investigators hesitated to cut. During excavation, beneath the skeletal remains, fragments of fabric were recovered that did not match Daniel's known clothing from the day he disappeared.
Different weave.
Different color traces embedded in soil chemistry. Contamination? Possible. Soil shifts over decades. Objects migrate. Or evidence of something else. The anthropologist flagged it quietly. Not conclusive. Not yet alarming. But notable. Because cold cases, once reopened, have a way of widening instead of closing. And as Arizona absorbed the shock of a 1977 mystery dragged into daylight, investigators began to ask a question that unsettled even them. If Daniel Mercer had been buried under that shed for 46 years, what else might the desert be holding? The fabric fragments were small, threadbare, easy to dismiss. But cold cases don't collapse under what is obvious. They unravel at the edges. In the sterile quiet of the forensic lab, technicians leaned over trays of soil-stiffened fibers recovered from beneath Daniel Mercer's remains. The color was faint, muted blue with traces of synthetic red threading, not consistent with the work jeans Daniel had been reported wearing the night he vanished. His sister had described them clearly in 1977. Dark denim, oil-stained at the knee, heavy cotton weave. This was different. Microscopic analysis confirmed it. The secondary fibers contained polyester blends common in late 1970s athletic jackets, windbreakers popular among younger men at the time. The weave density didn't match Daniel's clothing. The thread composition didn't match anything listed in the original property inventory, which meant one of two things: contamination from decades underground, or another body had once occupied that space. The possibility hung in the lab like a held breath. Detectives expanded their grid. The excavation perimeter doubled. Ground-penetrating radar scanned deeper layers beneath and beyond the initial burial site. The anomaly under the shed had been distinct, rectangular, deliberate. But smaller disturbances now appeared along the edge of the former property line, faint shadows beneath the soil. 46 years of heat distort the earth. Roots push. Rain erodes. But certain shapes remain too straight to be natural. By day 3 of expanded digging, shovels struck something else.
Not with this time. Bone.
Smaller. Fragmented. Disarticulated. The field team went still again. Forensic anthropology moved in with meticulous care. Each fragment was brushed, photographed, mapped. The skeletal pieces were partial: ribs, phalanges, a portion of jaw. Not a complete body. Not arranged. Scattered as if hastily covered or disturbed by time. Preliminary assessment: male. Age range approximately 18 to 25. Trauma undetermined. Daniel Mercer had not been alone. The headline shifted overnight. Arizona 1977 cold case expands. Second set of remains found. Shock rippled through Coconino County. The narrative was no longer a single act of violence buried beneath a garage. It was something broader. Something darker. Harold Bennett, once a peripheral figure in a forgotten file, was beginning to look less like a man who committed one crime in anger and more like someone who had practiced silence. Investigators raced against decay, against speculation, against history. Missing persons reports from the late 1970s were reopened, cross-referenced against age and gender approximations. One name surfaced quickly. Luis Ortega, 19, reported missing September 2, 1977. Last seen leaving a gas station 3 towns over. His case had never gained traction. Transient lifestyle. Occasional odd jobs. Limited family advocacy. The file thin. The follow-up minimal. He had vanished less than 3 weeks after Daniel Mercer. The geographic proximity was impossible to ignore. DNA extraction from the secondary remains would take time, but circumstantial alignment was tightening into pattern. 2 young men, both connected loosely to automotive work. Both disappeared within weeks. Both in northern Arizona. Both now possibly beneath the property of Harold Bennett. Detectives revisited Bennett's past with fresh eyes. Employment records revealed he had briefly worked security at a warehouse where Luis Ortega once applied for work. No documentation of interaction, but again proximity. Old bar tab surfaced. Bennett had frequented a roadside tavern known for cash betting on informal races and illegal car parts exchanges. Daniel Mercer, as a mechanic, would have been valuable in that world. Luis Ortega, known to drift between auto shops for temporary work, might have crossed the same orbit. The emerging theory began to harden. Bennett wasn't just a violent man. He was a man who leveraged opportunity. Financial motives resurfaced. Daniel's missing $4,000. Luis Ortega had withdrawn a smaller but notable amount, $800, days before his disappearance. Not life-changing sums, but enough to matter to someone chronically unemployed and prone to barroom debts. The rusted pipe recovered earlier was sent for advanced trace analysis. Even after decades underground, microresidues sometimes persist. Blood proteins degrade, but metallic impressions and particulate transfers can endure. Under magnification, faint traces consistent with bone contact were detected along one end. Not definitive DNA, but structural impact marks aligned with blunt force trauma. One weapon, multiple victims. The desert had not just hidden a body. It had hidden a pattern. Community fear began to shift from shock to retroactive dread. Parents who had lived through the late 70s revisited memories. Unsettling encounters. A man who lingered too long in parking lots. A pickup truck idling near the highway shoulder. Details once dismissed as unease now reframed as warning signs missed. Bennett's surviving relatives were contacted. A nephew agreed to speak. He described Harold as moody, private, someone who kept tools locked and windows covered. He remembered a section of the garage that children were told never to enter. He remembered, once, a strong smell of something metallic and sour in the late summer of 1977. He had been 8 years old. Memory is unreliable, but patterns are not. DNA confirmation arrived for the secondary remains 6 weeks later. A partial match to a distant cousin of Luis Ortega. Enough for probabilistic identification. Not absolute certainty. The degradation was severe, but statistically compelling. The district attorney updated the public briefing. 2 homicides. Same property. Same time frame. Same suspect. Harold Bennett, deceased 2009, now posthumously linked to the deaths of Daniel Mercer and likely Luis Ortega. Yet the most unsettling revelation was still waiting. While cataloging items from Bennett's estate, boxes long stored by a distant relative, investigators found a locked metal trunk. Inside, old pay stubs, faded photographs, newspaper clippings, and a map. Folded tightly, creased at the edges. Marked with small red X's scattered across remote desert locations stretching miles beyond Bennett's former home. No explanation. No legend. Just marks. Search teams deployed once more. Some X's corresponded to nothing. Open land, undisturbed. Others revealed shallow depressions that time had mostly erased. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Alerts occurred at 2 separate marked sites. Excavation at the first produced animal remains. False alarm. The second site was different. Beneath 18 inches of hardened soil, searchers uncovered fragments of clothing, not skeletal remains this time, but fabric buried deliberately. A windbreaker.
Blue.
Synthetic red threading. Matching the fibers found beneath Daniel Mercer. Forensic analysis confirmed it was consistent with late 1970s manufacturing. No immediate DNA, but the correlation between map marking, fabric fragment under Daniel's body, and a secondary burial site suggested something calculated. The windbreaker had likely belonged to Luis Ortega, which meant his body may have been moved, relocated from an original burial site to the shed property, or partially relocated. The theory twisted. Perhaps Bennett had first buried Luis in the desert. Then, fearing discovery or driven by compulsion, exhumed and reburied remains closer to home. Or perhaps the map marked intended sites, plans interrupted. Investigators reconstructed Bennett's movements in 1977 through archived gas receipts and witness statements. He had taken unexplained trips into remote areas during late August and early September, days after each disappearance. The pattern deepened. And still, there was no confession. No direct statement explaining motive. No diary entry revealing impulse. Just violence.
Concealment.
Silence. The Mercer family received the official report naming Bennett responsible. Daniel would finally be laid to rest properly. A headstone engraved with dates that once felt unfinished. Luis Ortega's surviving relatives held a smaller, quieter memorial. His disappearance had never dominated headlines. Now it would, briefly, as part of a reopened nightmare. But as investigators stood in the desert scanning coordinates marked decades ago, a colder realization settled in. 2 confirmed victims. Multiple marked sites. A man with access to transient workers, to highways, to isolation. The 1977 cold case was no longer a single buried crime solved after 46 years. It was the beginning of something that might never be fully measured. The desert keeps secrets, and some of them may still be waiting beneath the surface, marked only by a fading red X no one has yet uncovered. The map was not random. That was the first conclusion the geographic profiler reached after overlaying Harold Bennett's red X markings onto a modern satellite grid of northern Arizona. The marks weren't scattered aimlessly across open desert. They formed arcs, clusters, a loose corridor stretching along secondary highways, old service roads, and abandoned mining paths rarely patrolled in the 1970s. This was an impulse. It was familiarity. Each X fell within a 20-minute drive of either Bennett's former residence or one of his known workplaces. Every location offered isolation, soft soil, and limited visibility from main roads. He hadn't chosen wilderness at random. He had chosen land he understood. Search teams divided the grid into sectors. Cadaver dogs rotated in shifts under punishing sun. Archaeologists joined law enforcement, trained to read soil disturbance like a language. Layers were peeled back centimeter by centimeter. At the third marked site, 5 miles west of the original shed property, the dogs alerted again. Excavation began at dawn. Unlike Daniel's grave, deliberate, boxed, concealed, this burial was shallow. No container, no plywood, just earth packed hurriedly over what time had reduced to fragments. A partial femur, vertebrae,
Teeth.
The forensic anthropologist examined the dental wear pattern on site and went quiet. "These aren't recent," she said. "And they're not Daniel, not Luis." The remains appeared older, perhaps mid-20s at death.
Male.
Trauma evident along the rib cage. Multiple fractures consistent with blunt force. 3. The number changed the atmosphere entirely. 3 bodies across 3 locations. All within Bennett's mapped corridor. All estimated to have died within a span of less than 5 years in the late 1970s. The press conference that followed was brief and controlled. Officials confirmed additional human remains linked geographically to the reopened 1977 investigation. They avoided labeling Bennett a serial offender. Not yet. Evidence was mounting, but caution governed language. Privately, detectives stopped using the word isolated. They began using pattern. Back at headquarters, analysts reconstructed Bennett's timeline from 1975 to 1980. Employment gaps, traffic citations, minor assault arrests. Each incident now re-examined for geographic proximity to missing persons cases during that era. 2 more disappearances surfaced. Kevin Morales,
22.
reported missing November 1978. Last seen hitchhiking near Interstate 40. Case file thin. No follow-up after 3 months. Ethan Crowley,
25.
reported missing April 1979. Worked construction briefly in Flagstaff. Vanished after telling coworkers he was meeting someone about easy cash. Neither case had ever connected to Daniel Mercer or Luis Ortega. Until now. Investigators pulled archived composite sketches from minor assault complaints filed against Bennett in 1976 and 1978. In both incidents, young men described being approached with offers of cash for car repair help or transport assistance. Both described arguments escalating quickly. Both survived. Neither had pursued charges. The behavior aligned too cleanly. Allure, money, isolation, blunt force, burial. The forensic lab completed initial analysis on the 3rd set of remains. Dental records were limited, but mitochondrial DNA testing linked the bones to a maternal relative of Kevin Morales with high probability. 3 names were now statistically tied to Bennett's map sites. The district attorney convened a special task force, not to prosecute, but to document conclusively. to create a formal record acknowledging victims who had disappeared into silence. Because if Bennett had indeed killed at least 3 young men between 1977 and 1978, the narrative of a single robbery gone wrong no longer held. It suggested something colder. Compulsion.
Opportunity. Control.
Psychological profilers reviewed what little remained of Bennett's life history. Childhood marked by instability. Episodes of sudden rage documented in juvenile reports. A pattern of domineering behavior in relationships. Isolation increasing through the late 70s. But nothing in his public record screamed serial violence. That was the unsettling part. He had blended in, worked jobs, paid bills, died quietly in 2009 of heart failure, never formally accused of anything beyond bar fights and petty assault. And beneath his garage, the desert had kept his ledger. Search efforts continued across remaining X marks. Some yielded nothing. Natural soil anomalies misread by aging ink. Others produced personal artifacts, a rusted belt buckle, a shattered wristwatch, fragments of rope fiber embedded deep enough to suggest deliberate burial. At one site, investigators uncovered a driver's license, brittle, cracked, but legible after careful preservation. Name: Ethan Crowley. Expiration: 1981. He had never renewed it. The remains found nearby were too degraded for immediate identification, but context tightened the noose of certainty. Crowley likely joined Daniel, Luis, and Kevin in Bennett's private graveyard for possible victims. And still, the question gnawed at investigators. Why move some remains and not others? Why bury Daniel under a shed but leave others in shallow desert graves? The working theory began to crystallize. Daniel Mercer may have been different. The boxed burial beneath Bennett's property suggested fear. Urgency. Perhaps Daniel had threatened exposure. Perhaps he had known Bennett personally enough to endanger him. The controlled concealment implied risk management. The others? Opportunistic. Transient. Less likely to generate sustained searches. Buried quickly along known corridors. But speculation, no matter how informed, remained speculation without confession. In reviewing archived police dispatch logs from August 1977, a detail surfaced previously dismissed as irrelevant. A motorist had reported seeing 2 vehicles parked nose-to-nose along Highway 89 the night Daniel disappeared, a sedan matching Daniel's description, and a light-colored pickup. The caller had mentioned raised voices. Officers responded 20 minutes later. The vehicles were gone. In 1977, without confirmation of a crime, the report was filed and forgotten. Now it read like a snapshot of the moment before impact. The recovered rusted pipe was subjected to comparative impact analysis against Daniel's skull fracture. 3D modeling showed high congruence. The pipe's diameter aligned with the fracture width. The deformation patterns matched expected force angles. It was likely the weapon. No DNA survived. Too much time. Too much heat. But science had advanced enough to tell the story in absence of blood. Meanwhile, community reaction intensified into something heavier than shock: anger. How had this gone unnoticed? How had multiple young men disappeared within miles of each other without a task force forming in the 70s? The uncomfortable truth lay in context. Transient workers. Limited resources. No digital databases linking counties instantly. Missing adult males were not prioritized the way child disappearances were. If no body appeared quickly, if no clear crime scene emerged, cases faded. Bennett had exploited that blind spot. And the desert had cooperated. At the 5th marked X, excavation revealed nothing human, but investigators found a length of weathered rope buried deliberately. The fibers matched those found near Kevin Morales' remains. Similar knotting technique. Same degradation profile. Consistency. Control. The profiler's report concluded with a chilling assessment. Bennett likely targeted young men with access to cash and minimal immediate oversight. He offered opportunity. He created isolation. He used blunt force, quick, silent. He buried close to routes he traveled frequently. He retained mementos, maps, perhaps as trophies or reminders. But what he did not leave behind was explanation. No manifesto, no written confession, no bragging overheard by credible witnesses. Just silence. As Arizona media began using the phrase 1977 serial cold case, officials resisted officially labeling it until identification of all remains was confirmed. Still, the pattern was now undeniable to anyone reviewing the map. Red X after red X. And beneath at least 4 of them, bone. 46 years after Daniel Mercer vanished, the case had transformed from a single mystery into a reopened chapter of buried violence stretching across miles of desert highway. Investigators stood at the edge of another excavation site as dusk settled purple over the horizon. The air cooled quickly, as it always had. Coyotes called somewhere beyond the floodlights. They looked down at disturbed earth marked by aging ink decades ago and understood something with quiet certainty. The 1977 cold case was never just one body under a shed. It was a corridor of death drawn in red, and the desert had only begun to give it back. The 5th site was the one that didn't fit. No red X marked it on Bennett's map. No faint circle of ink. No aging crease pointing investigators toward disturbed soil. It surfaced by accident, a cadaver dog breaking formation, veering sharply off the predefined grid as if pulled by something older than training. Handlers tried to redirect. The dog refused. 30 yards beyond the mapped boundary, near a dried wash choked with brittle mesquite, the animal began pawing at ground hardened by decades of sun. No visible depression. No obvious anomaly. Just earth that looked like every other stretch of Arizona desert. But the dog would not move. Excavation began cautiously. Layer by layer, the soil darkened. Not from moisture, there was none, but from organic saturation. The scent changed first, then texture, then bone surfaced. Not arranged, not boxed, not shallow, like the others. This burial was deeper, nearly 3 feet down, and older. The skeletal remains were fragile, collapsing at contact. Long bones fractured by time. A skull partially crushed not by impact, but by weight of earth pressing over decades. Preliminary assessment suggested a death occurring earlier than the others. Possibly mid-1970s. Possibly even before Daniel Mercer. The anthropologist's voice remained steady, but the implication was seismic. If this is connected, she said, we're looking at a timeline that extends further back than 1977. Which meant Bennett's violence may not have started with Daniel. It may have been underway long before anyone noticed. Investigators searched historical missing persons reports dating back to 1973 within a 100-mile radius. Records were incomplete, some stored only on microfilm, others handwritten and barely legible. Names surfaced, faded, and resurfaced again as analysts combed through decades-old paperwork. One report stood out. Thomas Tommy Laird, age 20, reported missing May 1975. Last seen accepting a ride from a man driving a light-colored pickup near a truck stop outside Flagstaff. No license plate recorded. Description vague. The case stalled within weeks. The physical description aligned loosely with the remains. Age range consistent. Location plausible. But confirmation would take months of delicate forensic work. Meanwhile, investigators returned to Bennett's personal history with sharpened scrutiny. Employment records revealed he had purchased the property with a detached shed in late 1974. Before that, he rented a smaller home 10 miles east, near another cluster of now-faded red markings on his recovered map. Had there been earlier sites now lost to development? To erosion? To construction? Aerial photography archives from the 1970s were pulled and digitized. Analysts overlaid historic images onto modern satellite views, searching for soil disturbances long since flattened by time. In one 1976 photograph, taken during a county land survey, a rectangular patch of darker earth appeared briefly behind Bennett's original rental property. That house no longer stood. A shopping plaza occupied the land now. Excavation there would be complex, disruptive, expensive, politically fraught. But the question loomed heavier with each new discovery. How many? Back at the lab, the remains from the fifth site revealed something chilling under closer examination. The skull bore a depressed fracture similar in shape and dimension to Daniel Mercer's injury. Blunt force. Rear impact. No evidence of gunshot or sharp force trauma. Consistency across victims. One weapon or one method. The rusted pipe found under the shed might not have been unique to Daniel. It might have been Bennett's instrument of choice. Financial records added another layer. Between 1975 and 1979, Bennett made irregular cash deposits shortly after each known disappearance. Amounts varied, $500 here, $1,200 there, but the timing aligned disturbingly with reported missing dates. No evidence proved he robbed them directly, but the pattern was difficult to ignore. Victimology analysis deepened. All known or suspected victims were young adult males. All had access to modest sums of cash. All were last seen near highways or automotive-related locations. Several were transient or recently relocated, reducing the likelihood of sustained search efforts. Bennett had chosen targets who could vanish quietly. And for decades they did. Community reaction shifted again from anger to something more complex. Fear retroactively, threading through memories. Men now in their 60s recalled hitchhiking in the 70s along those same highways. Recalled accepting rides. Recalled declining offers that now seemed sinister in hindsight. I could have been one of them, one man told reporters, voice trembling not from age but from realization. At the Mercer family's small memorial service, Daniel finally laid to rest properly after 46 years. The narrative had changed completely. What began as a single cold case solved had transformed into exposure of a probable serial killer who died without ever facing a courtroom. Closure felt incomplete. Justice felt abstract. Detectives expanded the search radius around the fifth site, using LiDAR scanning to detect subtle topographical anomalies invisible to the naked eye. The technology revealed faint depressions along an abandoned service road once used by mining trucks in the mid-1970s. Excavation there yielded fragments of fabric, deteriorated beyond pattern recognition, and a single boot's sole embedded deep enough to suggest deliberate burial. No remains were immediately recovered, but the soil told a story of disturbance. Back in the evidence room, analysts re-examined the handwritten note from 1977 that had read simply, "Check the shed." Graphology experts compared the handwriting to archived documents from past interviews. It did not match any known officer. It did not match Daniel Mercer's writing. It did not match Harold Bennett's. The source remained unknown. Had someone suspected him decades ago? A neighbor? A witness too afraid to speak openly? A relative who sensed something wrong? The note had sat in a file for nearly half a century, unanswered. Investigators canvassed surviving residents who had lived near Bennett's property in the 70s. One elderly woman recalled hearing metal clanging late at night during the summer of 1977. Another remembered a strong odor, like something rotting, that lingered for days but was dismissed as animal carcass. No one had called police. No one had pushed. Because at the time, there was no confirmed crime. As forensic timelines solidified, analysts proposed a chilling possibility. Daniel Mercer may not have been Bennett's first victim, but he may have been the one who escalated something. Perhaps a confrontation. Perhaps resistance. Perhaps an attempt to expose previous wrongdoing. The boxed burial suggested panic. The map suggested planning. The deeper, earlier grave suggested evolution. Bennett's violence may have matured over time. Search teams continued scanning remaining red excess. Some yielded nothing. Others revealed subtle disturbances, too degraded for certainty. The desert, generous in its silence, was not obligated to surrender every secret. But 5 probable victims now stood in the ledger. Daniel Mercer, Luis Ortega, Kevin Morales, Ethan Crowley, possibly Thomas Laird. 5 young men lost between 1975 and 1979. All within driving distance of one man's home. All buried beneath land he knew intimately. As investigators closed another excavation site at dusk, The sun dropping behind jagged silhouettes of distant hills, the air cooled quickly, just as it had on August 12, 1977, when Daniel Mercer left work to settle something. 46 years later, the cold case that once seemed singular had fractured open into something far larger. And still, the desert stretched wide beyond the floodlights. Unmarked, unmapped, holding silence in every direction. The question no longer felt like whether Bennett had killed. It felt like whether the ground beneath Arizona had finished speaking at all. By the time the sixth excavation began, the word cold case no longer carried the quiet tone of archival review. It sounded explosive. It echoed across national headlines. Arizona 1977 cold case solved. Serial corridor uncovered. Commentators debated language. Legal analysts parsed the term solved against the reality that the prime suspect had been dead for 14 years. Families of the missing watched press conferences, with faces carved from decades of waiting. But the desert did not care about headlines. It cared about pressure.
Heat. Time.
The sixth site lay beyond the original Red X corridor, just outside the neat geometry of Bennett's markings. Investigators found it through pattern analysis, projecting his known travel routes against missing persons reports that had never intersected the earlier grid. One route cut sharply south toward an abandoned stretch of Route 66, long decommissioned in the early 80s. In October 1978, a state trooper logged a routine traffic stop involving Harold Bennett near that stretch. No arrest, just a warning for a broken taillight. The report included a detail overlooked for decades. Bennett appeared agitated, his pickup bed covered with a tarp secured by rope. No search conducted. No reason at the time. Now that detail felt radioactive. Cadaver dogs worked the old highway shoulder where gravel met open scrubland. It took less than 20 minutes for one to freeze mid-stride, nose pressed into wind, body rigid. The ground beneath was harder than expected. Excavation required mechanical assistance, a backhoe peeling away compacted layers before forensic teams stepped in by hand. At 30 inches down, the soil shifted color again, darker, looser, disturbed long ago. And then fabric. This time intact enough to show pattern. A plaid flannel shirt, faded to near gray, but still recognizable. Beneath it, skeletal remains curled slightly, as if the body had been forced into a shallow trench too small to accommodate it fully. The skull bore the same signature. Blunt force trauma to the rear. 6. The forensic anthropologist did not speak immediately. She didn't need to. The pattern had become rhythm. Rear strike. Rapid incapacitation. Burial in known terrain. No gunfire. No blade. Just impact and earth. DNA analysis later linked the remains to a man named Gregory Hale, 24, reported missing in January 1979 after telling coworkers he was meeting someone about buying a used engine for cash. The meeting location had never been confirmed. Now it had. Investigators mapped the expanding timeline on a whiteboard stretching across an entire conference room wall. 1975, probable first victim. 1977, Daniel Mercer. September 1977, Luis Ortega. November 1978, Kevin Morales. January 1979, Gregory Hale. Possibly April 1979, Ethan Crowley. 6 names. For confirmed through DNA. 2 strongly supported by contextual evidence. The murders clustered tightly within a 4-year window. Then they stopped.
Why?
Psychological profilers offered theories. Escalation and burnout. Increased scrutiny in the area. Personal life changes. Health decline. Or perhaps Bennett simply grew cautious after Daniel Mercer's disappearance triggered more visible community attention. A review of Bennett's medical history revealed he suffered a severe hand injury in mid-1979, crushed fingers from a garage accident. Surgery followed. Physical therapy. Reduced grip strength documented permanently. The rusted pipe required force. The timing was difficult to ignore. Perhaps the injury ended it. Or perhaps something else did. During a deeper forensic sweep of Bennett's estate records, investigators uncovered one more anomaly. In late 1979, Bennett abruptly sold the pickup truck seen in evidence photo 47. DMV transfer paperwork showed a quick transaction to a buyer out of state. No reason given. The truck vanished from Arizona. Investigators attempted to trace it, but decades had passed. Registration records grew murky across state lines. The vehicle likely scrapped long ago, but its removal felt symbolic, like a tool discarded after use. Community reaction hardened into something more sobering than outrage: reckoning. Town halls convened. Survivors of the 1970s spoke publicly for the first time about close calls. One man described being struck from behind during a roadside argument with Bennett in 1978, but managing to escape when the first blow glanced off his shoulder instead of his skull. He had reported the assault at the time, but without severe injury. Charges were minimal. The transcript existed. It had sat in archives while others were buried. Detectives reread it slowly. The survivor described Bennett's expression as flat, not angry, just focused. He described Bennett insisting they move off the road to talk privately. He described the flash of metal before the strike. It was the same script. The district attorney's office prepared an unprecedented public report, a comprehensive cold case reconstruction spanning nearly 100 pages. It laid out evidence chronologically. It named victims. It acknowledged investigative gaps from the 1970s without defensiveness. It stopped short of legally declaring Bennett a serial killer. Death prevented formal indictment, but the implication pulsed beneath every paragraph. In the lab, soil analysis from multiple burial sites revealed microscopic similarities, mineral composition consistent with Bennett's property and surrounding corridor. The evidence suggested he transported soil inadvertently on boots or tools between locations, reinforcing linkage across sites. Small details. But small details endure. As national media amplified the story, other counties began reviewing unsolved disappearances from the same era, searching for potential overlaps. No immediate matches surfaced, but the possibility lingered like heat above asphalt. The desert had already yielded 6. It could yield more. At the edge of the old Route 66 site, as remains were carefully lifted into transport containers, one detective stood looking at the horizon where highway met sky. He imagined January 1979, Gregory Hale climbing into a pickup under assumption of business, not knowing he was entering a ritual already rehearsed 5 times before. The brutality of repetition carried its own weight. 6 young men, lured by cash, struck from behind, buried in ground chosen not for concealment alone but for familiarity. Bennett had not been chaotic. He had been methodical. The 1977 cold case headline that began with Daniel Mercer had detonated into exposure of a multi-year killing corridor, dormant for 46 years. Families who had once assumed abandonment or accident were now confronted with homicide. Grief shifted shape. It found direction. It found a name. Harold Bennett. Dead in 2009. Uncharged in life. Unavoidable in death. As excavation equipment powered down and floodlights flickered against cooling desert air, investigators packed away tools knowing something irreversible had happened. The ground had spoken 6 times. And the silence between 1979 and Bennett's death in 2009 now felt less like innocence, and more like a chapter no one had yet found the courage to reopen. The silence after 1979 was too clean. That was what unsettled investigators most. 6 victims in 4 years. Then nothing. No confirmed disappearances along Bennett's corridor. No bodies. No shallow graves. Just an abrupt stop, like a switch flipped in darkness. Serial violence rarely ends without reason. So they looked for one. Medical records confirmed Bennett's crushed hand in July 1979. 3 fractured metacarpals. Surgical pins inserted. Limited grip strength afterward. The injury report noted permanent reduction in force application. A pipe requires force. But blunt force does not always require strength. It requires opportunity. Detectives widened their scope beyond Arizona. Bennett's employment history showed a 6-month contract job in Nevada beginning in late 1980. Temporary relocation near the Arizona-Nevada border. Small town. Sparse oversight. Highway access identical to his previous hunting ground. Cold case databases from Nevada were pulled. Missing persons reports between 1980 and 1982 filtered for male victims aged 18 to 30. The list was shorter than expected, but 2 names surfaced. Darren Pike, 21, disappeared March 1981 after leaving a bar outside Kingman to meet a mechanic with parts for sale. Never seen again. Samuel Ivers, 26, missing August 1982. Last contacted a friend saying he had found someone offering quick cash for car repair help. The phrasing echoed. Investigators contacted Nevada authorities. Cooperation was immediate. Old files reopened. Witness descriptions re-examined. One bartender from 1981, still alive, remembered Darren Pike leaving with a man driving a light-colored pickup. Arizona plates, I think, she said, uncertainty heavy in her voice. No plate number recorded. No follow-up at the time. Because Darren Pike had been known to drift. Because Samuel Ivers had debts. Because in the early 80s, adult men disappearing did not command the urgency they do now. Ground searches in Nevada began quietly. Bennett's temporary residence was long demolished, replaced by a storage facility. But aerial overlays showed a patch of undeveloped desert behind the former trailer park where he had lived. A dirt access road, barely visible now, once connected to a dry riverbed. Cadaver dogs swept the area in expanding circles. The first alert came near a collapsed mesquite stump. Excavation revealed bone fragments within hours. The skull fracture was unmistakable. Rear impact. Blunt force. No defensive wounds apparent. 7. DNA comparison with surviving relatives of Darren Pike confirmed high probability match within weeks. Nevada authorities announced the breakthrough carefully. 1981 disappearance linked to Arizona suspect in reopened cold case. The pattern had crossed state lines. And the clean silence after 1979 in Arizona now looked less like cessation and more like relocation. Investigators returned to Bennett's employment logs. He left Nevada abruptly in late 1982. No documented reason. He returned to Arizona permanently. By 1983, he was working a stable job at a warehouse with minimal travel requirements. No further known relocations. Missing persons data in Arizona between 1983 and Bennett's death in 2009 revealed no strong pattern matching his prior victimology. No cluster of young men disappearing along highways near his home. No confirmed graves tied to his mapped areas. Why stop in 1982? Medical records showed worsening cardiovascular issues beginning in the mid-1980s. Hospitalizations. Reduced physical activity. Neighbors described him as withdrawn, slower, less aggressive after 1985. Perhaps physical decline ended what compulsion began. Psychological profiling suggested another possibility, satisfaction. Some offenders cease when environmental risk rises or when personal circumstances shift enough to disrupt ritual. Bennett's 1979 injury, followed by interstate move, followed by aging health, may have fractured the pattern irreparably. But speculation could not replace excavation. Nevada searches expanded along Bennett's known commute routes. 2 additional sites were flagged by ground-penetrating radar. One yielded animal remains. The other produced nothing conclusive, disturbed soil too degraded for certainty. 7 confirmed or highly probable victims now span 2 states. Daniel Mercer remained the face of the headline. The 1977 cold case solved after 46 years, but the narrative had widened into a multi-state killing corridor operating between 1975 and 1982. Back in Arizona, investigators revisited the original shed site one more time. Advanced soil stratification analysis revealed microdisturbances beneath the layer where Daniel's box had rested. Subtle, compressed, suggesting the ground had been opened and resealed more than once before 1977. Daniel may not have been the first buried there. The possibility sent a quiet chill through the team. They excavated deeper beneath the original grave, careful not to disturb documented layers. At nearly 4 feet down, soil composition shifted again. And then a tooth. Single. Isolated. Human. No surrounding skeletal structure intact. Perhaps scavengers. Perhaps decomposition over 5 decades. But the depth placed it older than Daniel's burial layer. The anthropologist examined enamel wear, pulp cavity size, root development. Older male, she said softly. Maybe mid-20s. Hard to say. Another. The 8th potential victim. No immediate missing persons match surfaced from Arizona records in the early 70s, fitting the profile. The absence of a name felt heavier than confirmation. Because anonymity stretches grief indefinitely. Investigators traced Bennett's early movements prior to purchasing the shed property in 1974. He had lived briefly in California in 1973, working seasonal construction near Barstow. Employment lasted 8 months. Then he returned to Arizona. California authorities were notified. Old cases reopened. The map Bennett left behind did not include California. But the absence of a mark does not equal absence of act. Maps document what we choose to record. Perhaps he had not begun yet. Perhaps he had. As forensic teams cataloged the isolated tooth beneath the shed, the narrative sharpened into something no longer speculative. Between at least 1975 and 1982, Harold Bennett lured young men with promises of money or mechanical opportunity. He isolated them along highways or remote roads. He struck them from behind with blunt force. He buried them in terrain he knew intimately. He moved when necessary. He stopped when his body forced him to. 8 probable victims. 7 confirmed through DNA. 1 nameless tooth beneath a shed. The desert did not offer confession. It offered fragments. At a joint Arizona-Nevada press conference, officials acknowledged cross-state linkage formally. The phrase serial homicide investigation was used without hesitation for the first time. The crowd of reporters was larger than any gathering in Coconino County for decades. Families stood together. Mercer, Ortega, Morales, Hale, Pike. Some meeting for the first time, bound not by geography, but by a man who had used highways as hunting ground. A journalist asked the question everyone had been thinking. Do you believe there are more victims? The lead detective paused. We believe the number may not be final. That was as far as certainty could go. As night fell over the old Nevada dig site, floodlights casting long shadows over desert scrub, investigators packed away equipment knowing something irreversible had happened again. The 1977 cold case headline had cracked open a corridor stretching across years and state lines. And beneath the surface of both deserts, Arizona and Nevada, the ground still held more silence than answers. The clean break after 1982 no longer felt reassuring. It felt like the edge of something that might simply not have been found yet. The 8th victim did not have a name. Not yet. The single tooth recovered beneath the original shed burial sat in a sterile container under fluorescent light, tagged with a temporary identifier, unknown male 8. It was small, unremarkable, but it carried more weight than any headline, because it suggested the timeline stretched even further back than investigators had dared to assume. If Bennett began killing before 1975, then the known corridor was only a fragment. Forensic odontologists analyzed the enamel wear under magnification. The tooth showed moderate attrition consistent with someone in their mid-20s to early 30s at time of death. Microscopic striations suggested a diet high in coarse grains or unprocessed food, not uncommon in the early 70s, but notable. Carbon dating on residual organic material placed the burial layer between 1973 and 1976. Earlier than Daniel. Earlier than Luis. Which meant the violence likely began soon after Bennett purchased the property in 1974, or possibly even before. Investigators shifted their focus backward. California authorities reopened files from Bennett's 8-month stint near Barstow in 1973. 2 missing persons cases resurfaced quickly. Eric Valdez, 23. Disappeared July 1973 after telling coworkers he was meeting a man offering cash for auto repair work outside town. Mark Hensley, 28. Missing September 1973. Last seen hitchhiking along Interstate 15 near a rest stop frequented by construction workers. Descriptions of the suspect in both cases were vague. White male, mid-30s, pickup truck. That was all. Bennett had been 28 in 1973. Age discrepancy small. Vehicle consistent. Searches began in California desert scrub near Bennett's former job site. The land had changed. Wind turbines now dotted the horizon. Access roads carved through old terrain. But cadaver dogs were brought in regardless. At the third sweep, a dog alerted near a low ridge overlooking a dry basin. Excavation uncovered skeletal fragments within 24 hours. Blunt force trauma again evident along the posterior skull.
9.
DNA extraction would take time, but the pattern was now unmistakable. Same method, same demographic, same isolation tactic. The corridor was no longer confined to Arizona and Nevada. It began in California. The timeline now spanned 1973 to 1982. Nearly a decade. Investigators reconstructed Bennett's early years with sharper scrutiny. He had been discharged from a short-term vocational program in 1972 following a physical altercation with another student. Records described him as volatile under perceived disrespect. No criminal charges filed. In early 1973, he relocated to California for seasonal construction. That was where the first suspected victims vanished. When he returned to Arizona in 1974 and purchased the Shed property, the killings resumed. This was not escalation born in 1977. It was progression. Back in Arizona, forensic teams revisited every burial site for deeper soil sampling, searching for microevidence that might link early California remains to later Arizona sites through tool marks or soil transfers. The rusted pipe, once believed possibly unique to Daniel Mercer, was re-examined under comparative metallurgy. Toolmark analysis suggested consistent impact patterning across multiple skull fractures, slight asymmetry at one end of the pipe indicating a chipped edge present during several strikes. That chip had existed for years. It was not a one-time weapon. It was ritual. The Joint Task Force now spanned 3 states. Weekly briefings replaced monthly updates. National databases cross-referenced unsolved disappearances between 1973 and 1985 involving young adult males last seen near highways or auto-related job offers. Names surfaced from New Mexico, from Utah. Most did not align geographically with Bennett's documented movements. But the exercise revealed how fragile the historical record was, how easily a man could operate within cracks between jurisdictions before digital networks stitched information together. At a public forum in Flagstaff, families asked the question directly. How many? The lead forensic anthropologist answered with clinical restraint. We have confirmed 7 through DNA. 2 more are strongly supported by physical evidence. Additional victims are possible. Possible. The word carried weight heavier than confirmed. Meanwhile, investigators uncovered something inside Bennett's old storage locker, overlooked during initial estate review because it had been leased under a variation of his name. Inside were old newspapers from 1977 and 1979, folded open to articles about Daniel Mercer and Kevin Morales. Clippings marked with faint pen circles around certain phrases. Missing along highway. Last seen with unknown man. No suspects identified. He had kept them. He had read about himself without seeing his name printed. That detail shifted the psychological profile again. Bennett was not merely concealing crimes. He was tracking them, measuring community response, assessing risk. In one margin, barely visible, a handwritten word appeared beside Daniel Mercer's article. Careful. Was Daniel different because he resisted? Because he recognized Bennett? Because something about that interaction had nearly exposed him? The boxed burial under the shed now looked less like panic and more like recalibration. Investigators revisited Daniel's final phone call once more. Advanced archival recovery techniques extracted faint background noise from preserved telecom microfilm recordings, not voice, but environmental hum. Traffic pattern analysis suggested the payphone used that evening was adjacent to a rail crossing active at 6:40 p.m. Freight train logs confirmed a passing train at exactly 6:41 p.m., which placed Bennett at the diner payphone precisely when Daniel received the call. 46 years later, even ambient noise testified. In California, DNA results returned. The remains near the dry basin matched a distant maternal relative of Eric Valdez. Confirmation: 9 victims across 3 states. And still, investigators could not say with certainty the count had ended there. Bennett died in 2009 of heart failure at age 64. Medical records from his final years described limited mobility, chronic illness, isolation. No documented violent behavior after 1982. No arrests beyond minor disputes. If he stopped killing in 1982, he carried the knowledge alone for 27 years before dying quietly in a hospital bed. No confession. No remorse recorded. Just a map folded in a trunk. At sunset in the California desert, as forensic teams completed documentation of the 9th site, wind turbines turned slowly against an orange sky. The landscape looked serene, harmless. But beneath it lay proof that a man had used open land as ledger pages for nearly a decade. The 1977 cold case headline that began with one missing mechanic had unraveled into a multi-state serial homicide investigation stretching back to 1973. 9 names now etched into record. 1 tooth still unnamed. And investigators understood something with unsettling clarity. The desert does not distinguish between first victim and last. It only holds what is given to it. And Harold Bennett had given it far more than anyone imagined. By the 9th excavation, the rhythm had become almost mechanical. Grid the land. Mark the anomaly. Peel back layers. Photograph.
Bag.
Label. Confirm. But routine did not dull impact. The 9th confirmed victim, Eric Valdez, had already stretched the timeline back to 1973. The unnamed tooth beneath the Arizona shed remained unresolved, hovering like a question mark at the root of the entire case. Investigators could not ignore the possibility that Bennett's violence began even earlier, that California in 1973 was not the origin, but merely the first body found. The task force expanded its historical lens to 1970. Harold Bennett would have been 25. Employment logs placed him briefly in northern New Mexico in 1971, working seasonal labor near Gallup. Records were sparse, but a pay stub survived in an archived tax filing. 6 months. Then gone. New Mexico authorities reopened missing persons files from that window. 2 reports surfaced, but lacked sufficient overlap. 1 case, however, lingered. Anthony Tony Ruiz, 22. Disappeared October 1971. Last seen leaving a service station with a man offering cash for mechanical assistance. Description: white male, mid to late 20s, driving a pickup. The pattern was beginning to feel less like coincidence and more like blueprint. Search teams deployed along old service roads near Gallup where Ruiz was last seen. Decades had reshaped the terrain. Highways widened, buildings erected, land developed. But beyond town limits, desert remained stubbornly unchanged. Cadaver dogs swept a stretch of scrub near an abandoned quarry. An alert. Excavation revealed bone fragments within 2 days. The skull, though partially crushed by time, bore the now familiar fracture at the back of the cranium. Blunt force. Rear impact.
10.
DNA confirmation would take months, but investigators felt the weight immediately. If Ruiz was confirmed, Bennett's known killing span would stretch from 1971 to 1982, 11 years. 11 years of luring young men along highways with promises of quick money. 11 years of striking from behind. 11 years of burying bodies in earth he believed would never be disturbed. Back in Arizona, forensic experts conducted a comprehensive comparison of cranial fracture morphology across all recovered victims. High-resolution 3D imaging revealed consistent dimensions and impact angles in at least 8 of the 10 cases. Minor variations were attributed to positioning and soil compression, but the signature was clear. One weapon type, one method, one offender. Investigators re-examined Bennett's early life again. Childhood records indicated a move from Colorado to Arizona in 1969 following a violent altercation between Bennett and a coworker. No serious injuries reported, but the pattern of abrupt relocation now seemed significant. Had he killed before 1971? Or had something in 1971 triggered the beginning? Psychologists revisited the profile. Some serial offenders begin later in life after a stressor. Others harbor violent ideation long before first act. Bennett's background revealed no documented homicidal behavior prior to 1971, but absence of documentation is not absence of act. In Nevada, an additional search near the dry riverbed where Darren Pike was found yielded a buried object wrapped in decayed canvas. It was not bone.
It was a watch.
The back engraved faintly, SI 1979. Samuel Ivers. The engraving confirmed something investigators had suspected but not proven. Bennett sometimes removed personal items, perhaps as trophies, perhaps as identifiers he later buried separately. Control over narrative. Control over memory. He did not merely hide bodies. He curated silence. The watch had been buried apart from remains, nearly half a mile from Ivers' grave.
Why?
Perhaps fear of being caught with it. Perhaps ritual separation. Perhaps impulse. But the act suggested something deeper than robbery. He wanted possession, even if temporary. As national coverage intensified, experts debated classification. Some argued Bennett fit criteria of organized serial offender, planned, methodical, geographically consistent. Others noted the opportunistic financial lures suggested hybrid motivation, monetary gain intertwined with control and violence. Families of victims gathered in Flagstaff for a joint memorial. 10 empty chairs placed in a row. 10 names spoken aloud, some confirmed, some pending DNA, but supported by overwhelming evidence. Daniel Mercer's sister held a photograph of her brother taken in 1976, a year before he vanished. She looked at the line of families and said quietly, "We thought we were alone." They were not. The cold case that once revolved around a single mechanic had exposed a decade-long corridor of death across 4 states. Investigators returned to Bennett's financial records once more. Between 1971 and 1982, cash deposits totaling approximately $18,000 were documented following known disappearance windows. Not enormous sums, but consistent. Enough to suggest robbery was component, not sole driver. Because robbery alone does not require burial. Robbery alone does not require blunt force to the back of the skull. Robbery alone does not require a map marked with red excess. At the New Mexico dig site, as remains were carefully cataloged, one forensic technician paused over a fragment of fabric still clinging to bone. Blue windbreaker material with faint red threading. The same blend found beneath Daniel Mercer's body. Transfer evidence, perhaps. Or shared garment type common in the era. But the recurrence sent a quiet tremor through the team. Had Bennett reused clothing from victims? Had he handled them in ways that transferred fibers between sites? Or was the windbreaker fragment beneath Daniel evidence that one victim had been moved atop another at some point before final burial? The soil beneath the shed had shown multiple disturbance layers. The ground itself was a palimpsest of violence. If the unidentified tooth beneath Daniel's grave belonged to someone from 1974 or earlier, then the shed property may have been Bennett's earliest burial ground after returning from California. Meaning the land itself was Chapter 1. As night fell over the New Mexico quarry, floodlights illuminating bone against red earth, investigators understood something irreversible. The 1977 cold case headline had become inadequate. This was no longer a single mystery solved after 46 years. It was exposure of an 11-year killing span hidden in plain sight across highways millions had traveled without suspicion. 10 victims confirmed or strongly supported. One unnamed tooth still waiting. And perhaps more ground yet untouched. The desert does not measure time the way people do. It does not mark anniversaries. It does not announce when a killer stops. It only waits. And for 11 years, it had waited beneath the boots of a man who believed silence would outlive him. The desert does not forget. It waits. By the time 2006 bled into 2007, the file was thick enough to break a wrist. Photographs curled at the edges. Interview transcripts yellowed into a sickly shade of old nicotine. Evidence logs stamped, re-stamped, corrected in red ink. Names crossed out. Leads circled, underlined, abandoned. Arizona 1977 cold case. The phrase had become ritual, almost liturgical inside the department. A ghost story officers told rookies when the hallway lights flickered after midnight. But ghosts do not leave fingerprints. Detective Ray Navarro had been 2 years old when the girl vanished. Now he was the one standing under the same desert sun, reading statements written in typewriter font, trying to hear urgency in the clack of old keys. He saw the same phrases again and again. Last seen at 8:47 p.m. Blue sedan idling. Argument overheard. And beneath it all, a simple line that mocked the decades. No suspect identified. The missing evidence. That was the wound that never closed. Somewhere between intake and storage, a small sealed envelope had disappeared.
Logged.
Catalogued. Then gone. It contained fibers collected from the driver's side of the blue sedan. The fibers were described as synthetic, possibly industrial, dark green. In 1977, that was as far as science could take them. The envelope was tagged and stored in a secondary locker. 3 months later, when the locker was audited, the envelope was missing. No sign of forced entry. No record of transfer. Just absence. Absence is loud. Rumors swelled. An inside job. A mistake buried out of pride. A suspect protected. The department denied all of it. The file remained open. The parents grew older. The town grew quieter around the topic, as if speaking the girl's name too loudly might summon something worse. In 1992, the first real tremor shook the case. A drifter in Nevada confessed to a girl in Arizona. He described a desert road, a struggle, a shallow grave. Detectives flew out. They listened. They compared timelines. He knew details that had never been printed. For a week, the cold case felt warm again. Then the confession unraveled. He had copied newspaper clippings from a prison library. The details were public record. The grave he described yielded nothing but bones of cattle and dust. Another false dawn. Another headline that faded. Cold case hope fades after false confession. The years did what years do. Officers retired. The original lead detective died of a heart attack, his widow later donating his personal notes to the department. In the margins of his notebooks were scribbles that never made it into official reports. Check deputy's timeline. Blue sedan seen twice. Why green fibers? Green fibers. Navarro couldn't shake that phrase. He pinned it to a corkboard in his small office, surrounded by photocopies and maps. He studied photographs of the sedan, its paint dulled by evidence room air, its interior a museum of dust. He ran his fingers across the cracked steering wheel, imagining the night air of 1977 pushing through open windows, carrying heat and fear. Then in 2009, technology made a quiet promise. The department partnered with a state forensic lab to re-examine cold cases using advanced DNA profiling. Old swabs. Old hair samples. Old envelopes. Everything that still existed was unpacked, gloved, catalogued again. Navarro stood over a stainless steel table as technicians opened boxes that had not felt light in decades. But the envelope with the green fibers was still gone. What they did have was a single hair recovered from the back seat of the blue sedan. In 1977, it had been labeled inconclusive. In 2009, it became a thread of possibility. The lab extracted a partial DNA profile. Not enough for a direct match. Not enough for a name. But enough to enter into a national database. The system blinked back nothing. Months turned into a year. The partial profile sat like a question mark in a digital vault. Navarro began to feel the weight of inherited obsession. The town still remembered. Every anniversary, someone left white flowers at the edge of the desert road. The parents had both passed by then, their obituaries mentioning a beloved daughter lost in 1977. No closure, no answer, just grief that hardened into stone. Then, in 2012, a call came from the state archives. A clerk was overseeing the relocation of old municipal storage units scheduled for demolition. Rusted lockers, forgotten cabinets, paperwork from the 1970s deemed non-essential. As workers hauled out metal shelves, a small lockbox fell from a top rack and cracked open on the concrete floor. Inside were aging evidence envelopes, misfiled under an unrelated burglary case from 1978. One envelope bore a familiar code. Navarro drove to the warehouse himself. He watched as the clerk placed the envelope on a folding table under fluorescent lights. The paper was brittle. The seal had yellowed, but remained intact. Typed across the front, Case 77, ARZ 114. Fibers, driver side. For a moment, the world narrowed to that thin rectangle of paper. Missing evidence resurfaces after 46 years. The headline would come later. In that warehouse, it was just breath and trembling hands. Navarro signed the chain of custody form with a pen that scratched louder than it should have. The fibers were sent immediately to the lab. Modern microscopy revealed what 1977 could not. The fibers were a rare synthetic blend used primarily in commercial upholstery during the mid-1970s, manufactured by a single plant in California. The color, dark green, matched a specific production run distributed to auto shops specializing in custom interiors. Navarro followed the thread west. Old business records showed that one such auto shop had operated less than 30 miles from the desert road in 1977. It specialized in refurbishing fleet vehicles, including police cruisers and municipal cars. The owner had died in 1998. The shop had closed. But payroll records survived in microfilm. One name repeated across invoices from 1976 to 1978. A mechanic. Quiet. No criminal record at the time. Lived alone. Owned a blue sedan registered in 1977. The same model as the one described by witnesses. Navarro felt the room tilt. He pulled a mechanic's file. In 1983, the man had been questioned in connection with a bar fight. No charges filed. In 1991, he had moved out of state. In 2004, he had died of liver failure. Buried in a small cemetery in Nevada. Dead men do not stand trial. But DNA does not die. Navarro requested a court order to exhume the body. The request ignited local media. Cameras gathered outside the courthouse. The phrase Arizona 1977 cold case returned to headlines with a vengeance. Some called it justice delayed. Others called it a waste of resources. The town watched as if witnessing a resurrection. Under a pale sky, the grave was opened. Forensic technicians worked in silence. A sample was collected. Weeks later, the lab called Navarro back in. The partial DNA profile from the hair in the blue sedan had been compared to the exhumed sample. The result was not absolute. Degradation over decades had taken its toll, but the probability of a match was astronomically high. The mechanic had been in that car. But presence is not guilt. Navarro needed more. He revisited the old statements. One witness had described seeing a man arguing with the girl near the sedan. Grease under his nails, she had said. Like he worked with engines. In 1977, that detail had blended into the background noise of a working-class town. Now it screamed. Another witness had mentioned a patch on the man's jacket, a small embroidered logo. Navarro searched through archived photographs of the auto shop. In one faded image, employees stood in front of the garage bays. On their jackets, the same logo. It was no longer coincidence. It was convergence. The district attorney reviewed the evidence. A posthumous declaration was prepared. Officially, the department announced that the 1977 disappearance and murder had been solved. The mechanic was named as the primary suspect, supported by DNA, fiber analysis, and corroborating witness statements. Arizona 1977 cold case solved. Missing evidence resurfaces after 46 years. The headlines spread faster than desert wind. Yet in the quiet of his office, Navarro felt no triumph. The suspect was beyond reach. There would be no courtroom confession, no cross-examination, no moment where truth cracked open under oath. Just a press conference, a stack of documents, and a town trying to recalibrate its memory. Because memory had made room for doubt, for conspiracy theories, for the idea that maybe the girl had run away, started a new life somewhere beyond the horizon. The resolution replaced myth with something harsher. She had never left that night. She had trusted the wrong man. She had stepped toward a blue sedan and vanished into violence. Navarro visited the desert road one last time. The wind moved across the sand like a whisper. The white flowers were there again, placed by hands that still believed in ritual. He stood where the argument had been overheard, where the engine had idled, where a life had split into before and after. The case was closed. Officially. But the desert did not change. It held the heat. It held the silence. It held the memory of a girl whose name had once echoed through search parties and late-night broadcasts. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the road, the weight of 46 years pressed down in a single, unbroken line, from a missing envelope to a reopened grave, from green fibers to a mechanic's forgotten payroll record. Justice had arrived like a delayed storm, years too late to quench the original fire, yet powerful enough to alter the landscape. And in the fading light, one truth remained, steady and unblinking. The desert had waited, and eventually, it had given something back. The final file is thinner than the years it contains. 46 years reduced to a stamped cover sheet, a forensic summary, a signed declaration, and a single word typed in bold across the bottom. Closed. The ink is fresh. The grief is not. In the weeks after the announcement, the town moved through its days with a strange, brittle quiet. Reporters packed up their satellite trucks. The courthouse steps returned to pigeons and sunburned tourists. The headlines that had screamed Arizona 1977 cold case solved, missing evidence resurfaces after 46 years slowly slid down the news cycle, replaced by fresher tragedies, newer shocks. But inside living rooms and dimly lit kitchens, people replayed the night in their minds as if it had happened yesterday. Because now there was a face. The mechanic. The quiet man with grease under his nails. The employee photo, with the stitched logo on his jacket. The blue sedan registered in 1977. The rare green fibers that tied him to the driver's side door like an invisible tether stretching across decades. The partial DNA profile that survived heat, time, neglect, and bureaucracy. Science had done what memory could not. It had named the shadow. Yet even with a name, the air felt unfinished. There had been no confession. No trembling voice admitting what happened under that desert sky. No motive carved cleanly into the record. The official report reconstructed the likely sequence, an argument escalating, a forced entry into the vehicle, a struggle in the back seat, a drive toward isolation. But likely is a fragile word. It fills gaps without erasing them. Navarro read the reconstruction alone, long after the press conference applause had faded. He traced each paragraph with his finger as if the paper might pulse. The timeline clicked into place with a precision that bordered on cruel. 8:47 p.m., last seen alive. 8:52 p.m., witness hears raised voices. 9:03 p.m., blue sedan observed speeding toward the outskirts. After that, silence. The desert swallowed the rest. In 1977, search teams had combed the area for days. Helicopters cut across the horizon. Volunteers formed human chains, scanning sand and scrub for any sign. They found nothing. Wind reshaped the landscape faster than hope could keep up. The case file from those days reads like a diary of exhaustion. Grid searched. No findings. Expanded perimeter. Negative. Family notified of continued efforts. Family notified. Navarro visited the small cemetery where the girl's parents were buried. Their headstone bore both their names and, beneath them, a simple inscription, "Forever our daughter." No dates for her, just absence etched in stone. He stood there longer than he meant to, feeling the strange weight of closure delivered too late to be received. The exhumation report on the mechanic was clinical, detached. Measurements. Dental confirmation. Tissue sample extracted. It did not mention the way the town held its breath that morning as the grave was opened. It did not capture the tension between justice and intrusion, between the need for truth and the discomfort of disturbing the dead. But it ended the speculation. The DNA probability was clear enough to withstand scrutiny. The fibers matched the upholstery blend used in his shop during that narrow production window. The witness description aligned. Independent threads braided into a single rope. Still, some resisted. Talk radio lit up with callers questioning the certainty. Conspiracy theories resurfaced, mutated, clung to the edges of the narrative. What if the fibers were secondary transfer? What if the hair sample had been contaminated? What if the missing evidence had been planted in that warehouse decades later? Doubt is persistent. It does not retire easily. Navarro did not argue on air. He let the documents speak. He let the lab report stand. He understood that no explanation would ever feel sufficient to those who had built alternate versions of the past to survive the not knowing. For nearly half a century, uncertainty had been a coping mechanism. Replacing it with a single, stark conclusion required emotional recalibration. One evening, a woman in her early 50s knocked on the station door. She had been a teenager in 1977, part of the original search party. She remembered the heat of flashlights cutting through darkness, the sound of her own breath too loud in her ears. She told Navarro she had always suspected someone local, someone ordinary. "Monsters don't always look like monsters," she said, her voice steady but thin. "Sometimes they fix your car." Her words lingered. The blue sedan itself, preserved in evidence storage for decades, was finally cleared for disposal. Before it was towed away, Navarro asked for one last look. The interior smelled faintly of chemicals and time. The driver's seat, once the focus of so many questions, seemed almost mundane. He imagined the mechanic's hands on the steering wheel, the hum of the engine, the moment where a decision became irreversible. There is a point in every crime where possibility collapses into action. That point cannot be undone. Navarro closed the car door gently, as if noise might disturb something sacred. Outside, the desert wind carried dust across the lot, soft and relentless. In the months that followed, the department updated its protocols for evidence storage. Digital tracking replaced handwritten logs. Secondary audits became mandatory. The rediscovered envelope became a case study in academies across the state, a cautionary tale about misfiled proof and the endurance of physical traces. Recruits listened wide-eyed to the story of the green fibers, the warehouse demolition, the lockbox cracking open on concrete like fate asserting itself. But fate is a romantic word. In reality, it was a clerk doing her job, a shelf being emptied, gravity. Sometimes justice hinges on small, accidental moments. The anniversary of the disappearance arrived again, this time with a different tone. There was no candlelight vigil demanding answers. Instead, a modest gathering formed near the desert road. Flowers. Photographs. A brief statement from the mayor acknowledging the resolution and the endurance of the community. Navarro stood at the back, anonymous in plain clothes, listening as the wind threaded through microphones. When the crowd dispersed, he walked a short distance away from the others. The landscape looked unchanged from the archival photos: flat horizon, stubborn shrubs, sky too wide to comprehend. He tried to imagine the night in 1977, the temperature still high after sunset, the hum of insects, the faint glow of headlights. He tried to imagine the girl's last thoughts. Fear? Anger? Trust broken in an instant? He would never know. Closure, he realized, is not a door slamming shut. It is a quiet settling of dust. The facts align. The narrative stabilizes. But the emotional echo continues, reverberating in places paperwork cannot reach. Back at the station, the The file was archived in a different cabinet now, one labeled Resolved Cold Cases. It sat beside others, each with its own long road to conclusion. The label felt almost ceremonial. Resolved. As if resolution could erase the original violence. As if time could be rewound by declaration. Navarro turned off the light in his office and paused at the doorway. For years, the Arizona 1977 cold case had been an open wound in the department's history, a question mark hanging over generations of detectives. Now, it was a period at the end of a sentence. Definitive. Unyielding. Yet as he stepped into the hallway, he understood something unsettling and deeply human. The case was solved, but the loss remained unsolved in the hearts that had carried it. The mechanic's name would be remembered differently now, not as a quiet tradesman, but as the man who stole a life under a desert sky. The girl's name would no longer be paired with the word missing, but with something heavier, more final. Outside, night settled over the town the same way it had in 1977, slowly, inevitably, without ceremony. Streetlights flickered on. Cars moved through intersections. Somewhere, a radio played softly in an open window. Ordinary life, uninterrupted. The desert lay beyond the last row of houses, vast and patient. It had held a secret for nearly half a century. It had watched as searchers combed its surface, as investigators argued over files, as parents aged and died without answers. And in the end, it had not given up bones or buried artifacts to solve the mystery. It had yielded something subtler, fibers caught in fabric, a strand of hair clinging to upholstery, evidence small enough to be overlooked and strong enough to endure. Justice did not arrive with sirens. It arrived in a warehouse, in a cracked lockbox, in a laboratory report filled with probabilities. It arrived quietly, almost politely, asking to be acknowledged. And as the town drifted into sleep on the final night of the 46th year, there was a fragile sense that something long suspended had finally touched ground. The cold case was no longer cold. The silence had been interrupted. The missing evidence had spoken. In the darkness, beyond the streetlights and beyond memory, the desert wind moved again across the sand, indifferent and eternal, carrying with it the faintest echo of a story that had refused to die until it was heard.